This is the cheapest shop vac I've ever seen. And this is a dust extractor that sells for a mind-blowing $1,400. Does anybody else think that's excessive and ridiculous? Now, I want to know if these insanely priced vacuums are a legit buy once, cry once situation to protect your lungs, or are they a scam, a waste of money, and overkill? And I don't just want to know that answer. I want to, like you, probably see if there's an objective performance difference between these two extremes. In this video, I will run these vacuums through a variety of tests to find out if there's a real difference. I also broke the budget and I got a professional particle counter to measure the level of microscopic monsters that are released into the air we breathe when we sand. What I found is sobering. And as a bonus, I'll also show you how you can build your own pressure testing rig at home. And of course, I'll show you what not to do. Now, there's a few disclosures you should know about. First, I paid $29 for this rigid shop vac 14 years ago on a Black Friday sale. They're typically $100 at the store today. It's a typical shop vac, but because of this poor design and this one, it doesn't accept a bag. Believe me, I tried. Last year, I did a similar video comparing this vac to the Festool CT Midi that I also paid for, except that one was $659. Surprisingly, I'm still married. Now, I had 4,600 subscribers when I uploaded that video, and the reception and performance has been encouraging. Now, shortly after that video, 3M asked if I'd ever be interested in testing the new 3M extractor that they were releasing, and I said, sure. Then I never heard a word from them, and I assumed they either forgot about me or figured that I was just a dummy in my garage with cinematic lighting. 6 months later, out of nowhere, with no warning, email, tracking info, partnership, or any agreement of any kind, this thing showed up, and I've not heard from 3M since receiving this. I've even reached out, I've emailed, I've sent social media messages, nothing, crickets. Nothing. So they're either officially ignoring me, or they forgot that they sent this to me, or the person who sent it to me is no longer working anymore. The point is this: you should know that while I paid for these two, I didn't pay for this one. That way, if in the end I end up praising this thing and I recommend that you sell your kidney to buy it using my affiliate link, you'll be able to see right through it. And since I have this Festool here, I thought I'd throw it in the test as well to see how all three of these stack up. Now, these aren't exactly apples to apples comparisons. The 3M has 2 HEPA filters and an auto clean feature, and the Festool only has 1 HEPA filter and a manual clean option in a smaller bag. They're different sizes and models, but since I have it on hand, I wanted to see what differences are there. We'll test vacuum pressure and airflow to see if those have any effect on the air quality that you'd be breathing in when you're sanding. Basically, I want to know if this $1,400 3M extractor does a better job of keeping sawdust out of our lungs. A typical dust collector is going to be lower pressure and high volume, and a dust extractor is the opposite. It's going to be high pressure and low volume. Now, in theory, a shop vac is going to sit somewhere in between those extremes, but it isn't designed to do dust collecting or dust extracting. It's designed to clean up your shop, as the name suggests. I wanted to visually see how much these vacuums suck, and so to do that, I made an old school analog manometer, or as most call it, a YouTube meter. They're really simple to make. You take a tube, you fix it into the shape of a U, you fill it up about halfway with water, attach your vacuum to one side, and when you turn your vacuum, you can measure the difference in water levels, and you have inches of water lift. Now, it's the summer and school's out, so I have a new supervisor to help me in the shop. Like all supervisors, he really doesn't do much work, just kind of plays around and then gets super mad when things break or take more time. I 3D printed an adapter to connect the hose to the tube, filled it up with some Kool-Aid, fruit punch flavor naturally. Just kidding, it's red food coloring. I was so proud of myself and excited to show real objective results on YouTube until this happened.
No, 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 no! No, 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 no! Well, it appears that I did not make this tall enough, and that the Festool was too powerful and it sucked all the water up into the bin.
Mistakes were made, lessons were learned, and this time I set out to make a 9-foot tall YouTube meter, but instead of using 10 feet of tubing and plywood like I did last time, I used 25 feet of tubing and pegboard. I didn't want to buy some more plywood and drill a bunch of brackets, so I figured pegboard and zip ties would be fine. It was actually easier and cheaper. At this point, the supervisor was nowhere to be found, and just when I thought he was taking his 9th union smoke break in the last hour, he showed up with this. True story, all on his own. He went and made a fresh batch of Kool-Aid. I made a scale with masking tape, I zeroed it out, and then I made 1/2-inch TIG marks to the end. I doubled that measurement so I didn't have to measure both sides of the tube to get my inches of water lift reading. The supervisor disappeared again, but this time showed up with a branded sign he made because he heard me call it a YouTube meter. Smart kid, best summer ever. Now, since each vacuum came with its own hose and there are slight differences in the sizes, I used this cheap Syntec hose I got off of Amazon a few years ago on all 3. That way, the only thing changing is the vacuum itself. Now, on the highest setting, the Festool with a brand new HEPA filter and new empty bag measured 84 inches of water lift. And when I turned it on low, it hit 36.5 inches of water lift. On the lowest setting, the 3M with 2 brand new HEPA filters and an empty fleece bag measured 36.5 inches of water lift. And when I turned it on high, it peaked at 82.5 but settled down at 80 inches of water lift. Now the shop vac with a brand new filter and no bag because it won't take one measured 41.5 inches of water lift, just 5 inches more than the dust extractors on low. I also tried this with a dirty used filter that I banged clean and got the same result. With the baseline set using a brand new empty bag and brand new filter, I was sure that if I filled up the bags with sawdust, I'd see a significant drop in suction, especially when the cheap shop vac with no bag and an exposed cheap filter. I filled up a clear container with sawdust so that I could suck up the same amount in each vacuum. Well, those protocols went out the window as soon as the Festool stopped sucking halfway through. I thought I had a clog in the hose, but to my surprise, the bag was already full. Now, throwing all scientific standards out the window, I said screw it and used the shop vac to suck up the rest. And in a twist of irony, I used the shop vac to clean up the Festool port so I could turn it on for another YouTube test. To my surprise, the Festool extractor with a full bag still pulled 80 inches of water, 4 inches less than before, and the same as the 3M with an empty bag. I did the same test with a 3M extractor, and again, the bag filled up quickly. I used the shop vac once more to suck up the rest of the container and to clear out the 3M port for the YouTube test. With a full bag, the 3M pulled 77 inches of water, 3 inches less than it did on an empty bag. I figured the shop vac was done for, but no, it still wanted to eat, and boy did it feast. I double checked the container and it was full with the filter buried in sawdust. This was going to be an epic objective disaster made just for YouTube. When I hooked it up to the YouTube meter, it pulled 40 inches of water, 1.5 inches less than it did with an empty housing and filter. Now in these short-term initial tests, and I want to stress that, a full bag or container had very little impact on the suction. Now, my engineer friends tell me that the YouTube meter is measuring static pressure with 100% restriction. Those numbers are all fine, but what happens when you hook that vacuum up in a real world scenario, like when you use a sander? You're not going to have 100% restriction, so you'll have some pressure loss. But how much pressure loss? A lot? A little? Enough to make a difference? Well, it turns out Klein makes a digital manometer that a lot of HVAC technicians use to measure dynamic pressure and differences in systems. I 3D printed an adapter to go in between the hose and the 3M sander, which allowed me to stick this 5mm hose in at the side. Now this should show us how much pressure is going by. Hooked up to a sander, just sitting on the table flat with a mesh disc, the Festool measured 30.2 inches of water lift. Remember, it pulled 84 inches of water lift with the last static test. It's losing 53.8 inches of water lift. Oh my. The 3M measured 32.48 inches of water lift. It pulled 80 inches of water lift before. It lost 47.5 inches of lift. The shop vac measured 19.5 inches of water lift. It pulled 41.5 inches of water lift with the static test. It only lost 22 inches. Now I was expecting some loss, but not that much loss. I'm also shocked that the shop vac didn't lose more. The proper dust extractors are still pulling more than 10 inches over the shop vac, but I expected more performance out of those. Now, I was pleased to see that the dust extractors were twice as powerful in the static test, but I was surprised to see that they're only marginally more powerful in this dynamic test when you hook it up to a tool. At this point, I was really curious to see how this loss of pressure would affect the ability to capture and remove sawdust particles while sanding. With the pressure test done, it was time to test the CFM. I have this anemometer and it says Pro on it, so you know it's trustworthy. It measures wind speed, but not CFM. But using this engineering website, you can convert your wind speed readings to CFM if you know the size hose you've used, which in my case is 1 inch round. The shop vac measured 10 meters per second. The Festool measured 12.4 meters per second. And the 3M also measured 12.4 meters per second. Again, I use the same 1 inch Syntec hose that I got from Amazon on all these tests to keep things the same. Now, when you make the conversion using this new thing called math, which is kind of interesting, we find that the shop vac is showing a CFM of 42.95. Now, since this is a very scientific YouTube video, let's do the reasonable thing and round it up to 43. Both Festool and 3M showed 53.25 CFM. Let's round that down to 53 since we're responsible. So you have 43 and 53 CFM. It's a difference of 10, not much. That's not a huge difference, and I think that's due to the limiting factor of the 1 inch diameter of the hose. When I hooked up the 2 inch rigid hose to the shop vac off camera, it measured 225 CFM. So it seems that the vacuums can do more CFM, they're just at the mercy of the diameter of the hose. The proper dust extractors are slightly more powerful in terms of pressure and slightly more powerful in terms of airflow. Does that affect air quality when sanding? I use this air quality meter that I bought on Amazon, and I sort of trusted it because it was $189 and it was more expensive than the cheaper alternatives for $29. But I began to have suspicions when it started giving me very inconsistent numbers. I thought I'd try a fresh one, and when I bought the second unit a few weeks ago, it literally showed nothing, 0 for days. Did not work at all. I returned it. And it was at that point that all of my trust went out the window with this meter, along with caution and any resemblance of a budget. And since this video is built on the question of healthy air quality, I did the unthinkable and I bought a $1,500 particle counter just for this video because it claimed to be professional yet affordable.
How much was that?
Now, whether it is affordable or professional is debatable, but it is what it is. At least it came with a case and a way to calibrate it to 0. I wondered how close these meters would read next to each other, and as it turns out, not very close at all. Now, side note, how many of you have picked up on the irony that I'm testing a cheap orange tool versus a $1,400 gray professional tool? And to do so, I bought a $1,500 gray professional tool because I don't trust the cheap orange tool. In my previous video, I tested the quality of the air exiting the vacuums because I wondered how effective a HEPA filter is. But hundreds and hundreds of you asked me to test the air quality at the source when sanding because that has greater danger to your health. And I agree, it makes way more sense. So I put this new expensive source of marital strife on the workbench and I sanded plywood for 2 minutes, taking readings before and after. I used the same hose, this 3M extract sander, and a fresh disc of 120 grit extract. The only thing changing between the tests was the vacuum and the sandpaper. I put a new disc on for each test. I waited at least 30 minutes between each test, and I made sure that the initial reading was similar to others, but you should know that when I moved around, the readings jumped up and down, and so it was very hard to get a base reading within 100,000 or so particles. And so I tried my best, but this is what I was able to do. This source of divorce seems to be very sensitive to my garage, and obviously it's not a clean room. For that reason, I think it's best to measure the difference in particles from start to finish rather than looking at the absolute numbers that I got after sanding. Now, I started with the Festool, and then I did the 3M, and then I did the shop vac. All had brand new filters and empty bags, except for the shop vac, no bag. I also did a control where I sanded for 2 minutes without a vacuum and I wore a mask, and that was disastrous, and I did that last so I wouldn't contaminate the room. Now, if you're interested in downloading the raw data, check out the video description below the like button for a link for free. Now, to summarize my findings and convey the information visually, I charted the difference in particles from before sanding and after 2 minutes of sanding. The blue line on the top is the difference of particles in the air after 2 minutes of sanding without a vacuum. There were 2.9 million more particles in just one of the sizes that I measured in the air after 2 minutes. Chew on that. The green line on the bottom is the difference with the Festool extractor. The purple line is the 3M results, and the orange line is rigid naturally. And this light orange line is rigid but full of sawdust. I didn't test the other two full of sawdust because it was 107 outside in the summer in Texas. My garage was hard. I had my air conditioner off and my fan off to not contaminate the space. And I honestly, after 3 weeks of doing this, ran out of the drive to do 2 more tests. I'm sorry. To my surprise, the Festool 3M and the Shopvac were all bunched together and performed very similar. There's slight differences, but when you look at them in the context of not using a vacuum or extractor when sanding, they all seem on par with each other regardless of the price. I was expecting the high-end dust extractors to perform significantly better in this test, given that they had twice the suction power in my static pressure test. Now again, I'm not a scientist or an engineer, but I have a few initial thoughts of what I think could be going on. Number one, when you consider that both dust extractors were only marginally stronger in the dynamic pressure and CFM test, I guess this makes a little bit of sense. There's probably some minimum threshold of vacuum pressure and airflow that you need to cross to remove dust like this when you're sanding. And if that's the case, clearly this cheap Shopvac passes that threshold, at least initially. That could explain the similar performance. This 3M extract sander is engineered for dust extraction, and this mesh sandpaper is also engineered for maximum dust extraction. Using these two together may have helped the performance of all 3 vacuums, and I wonder if there would have been any performance differences if I used a cheap sander and cheap paper that isn't designed for maximum dust extraction. I also wonder if the Shopvac would stay at this level of performance after 10 minutes of sanding, or 30 minutes of sanding, or even hours of sanding. Like, what happens when you sand for hours every day, continually? Like, at what point does the motor fail? I would guess that the cheap motor would fail. What if there's finer sawdust and not these large chips that I used? Now, it is an assumption and I haven't tested it, but I still think that if you're sanding for a long period of time over and over, a cheap Shopvac probably isn't going to hold up to that level of use. Now, that would be an assumption that would need to be tested, but I have experienced a significant loss of suction and performance when I use the Shopvac with my CNC. The longer I run the CNC in a session, the less effective the dust collection gets using the Shopvac. And there have been times when it just stopped working all out and I had to empty the housing, clean the filter, and let the motor rest. I also wonder what results I'd get if I did longer tests and used finer materials like concrete dust or sheetrock joint compound in powder form. I was just sanding plywood and I wonder if that made a difference. I'm an artist and a communicator who dabbles in sarcasm. I know colors and shapes in video and design, but I don't know engineering or physics. I wish I did. And this is important because none of the numbers or data that I show you in this video should be considered as the concrete, absolute scientific truth to go by. There are too many variables, and I'm in a garage with tools I could find on Amazon or the App Store. And to think that a guy like me is able to get these tools clean room worthy or calibrated to perfection is laughable. So you should take everything on YouTube with a grain of pepper. So is this the part of the video where I tell you that if you bought a dust extractor, you've been suckered? Not exactly. I think the reality is more nuanced. Now, on one hand, I don't think that the average homeowner or even beginner woodworker must have a high-end dust extractor. You should take dust collection and respiratory health very seriously. But even with these short-term tests, it's hard for me to see a $500 or even a $1,400 value difference to the average homeowner or woodworker who's typically not running a vacuum hard or for long periods of time. A decent vacuum with a clean filter in a bag is going to do a lot for you, and you can also get cheap shop air filters and air scrubbers that for much less than an extractor. You can also open your garage door and improve ventilation with a cheap fan, and of course, you can wear a mask. There's cheap things you can do to protect your health without spending $1,400. You don't have to spend thousands of dollars to sand safely. In the short term, that said, you're not going to have the creature comforts that a dust extractor like the 3M gives you, such as variable speed, dual HEPA filters, the ability to clean the filter without opening up the vacuum, automatic on-off compatibility with pneumatic and electric tools, or really bougie features like the Bluetooth control if you get the Festool, which I kind of like. Those are all very nice to have, but I think most beginner woodworkers don't really need them, and they should probably invest their money in tools that they really need. Now, on the other hand, I also know that a lot of woodworkers aren't beginner and they do have disposable income to spend on high-end tools because this is their passion. And they do so for the joy of using the tool. Now, do I need my Festool dust extractor? No, but I love having it and I love using it because it makes cutting and sanding and cleaning up more enjoyable. And that's why I got into making, for the joy of it. So I personally am fine spending money on these high-end tools because I get joy out of it. And then there's the professional argument. If you're a pro and you're under certain OSHA standards, you don't have a choice. You have to have a HEPA-rated dust extractor on a job site. And it's good to have standards like that protecting employee and coworker health. Now, I did these tests with wood and pretty coarse sawdust. But if you're working with fine dust like drywall, concrete, silica, things of that nature, I do see the need for a machine that has higher suction, 1 or 2 HEPA filters on and off, and auto filter clean, and the 3M does have those features. When it comes to time and making money, warranty, durability, the ability to get things serviced, especially if you're a business, I completely understand why a professional woodworker would invest in a higher price vacuum like Festool or even the 3M. But even spending $1,400 on this 3M from Grainger is foolish. I know my friends at Tay Tools will sell it to you for $600 less. And if you're dead set on 3M, that's the cheapest place I've ever seen on the internet to get it. You should check them out. Now, if you've learned something or had a laugh or got any value out of this video, please consider subscribing, commenting, but most importantly, sharing it with another maker you know, because possibly this video could help save them some money. Big thanks to my science and engineer friends who have helped shape these tests and setups and have done their best to protect me from embarrassing myself. I've learned so much from you guys. Now, if you get any value from this video, you can thank them, not me. This video is 1,000 times better because of them. 1,000 times better. I told you I'm not a numbers guy. I just made that statistic up. Mark Twain would be proud though.